Check, check, mic check. Check, check, mic check. Welcome to Podcast Envy, episode 84. I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klender, and I know it has been a little while since I've been here with you in the feed, and that is because amazing things are happening in my business, and I'm cooking up some good stuff for you too, and I will be telling you all about that in the next episode, 85. But before we do that, we need to talk about something else, which is this phrase that I keep hearing in my head over and over again that friend, colleague, client Sarah Buino, creator and host of Conversations with a Wounded Healer podcast and host and co-creator of Transforming Trauma podcast, something that she said to me last year in 2020, which was that we as podcasters are part of the media. And I don't consider myself to be a journalist, and I wouldn't have necessarily considered myself to be part of quote unquote the media until she said that. But it makes sense when I think about the culture part of the craft and culture of podcasting, which is what Podcast Envy is all about, craft and culture. So for the culture part of podcasting, yes, we as podcasters are, if we're doing our job right, building platforms by which ideas and messages and thoughts are spreading and perpetuating. And we have a responsibility to be really mindful about what it is that we are sharing and also what we are not sharing and why we're making those decisions. And so that is why I want to take a moment here on Podcast Envy specifically to address what is happening in the media, even if not as prevalent or as strongly or as passionately as was the case with the George Floyd murder in 2020. But this March 2021 shooting in Atlanta, Georgia, taking place at Gold Spa and Aromatherapy Spa. And originally, I was not going to say anything about this because I didn't know that much about it and because it didn't get the collective or hasn't gotten the collective attention that some of those other crises of race and violence were getting in 2020. Oh, yes, I did say race and violence because I do believe that is what this is, part of what this is. And I don't think that I am the best person to be telling you anything at all about this, except that I know that there are those who are saying that this tragedy, in which multiple people were gunned down by one single white male in a premeditated fashion with a legally obtained gun, I know there are some that are saying that this incident was perhaps not racially motivated. And even I entertained this idea. I thought, well, it could be gender motivated, a misogynistic crime against women. I thought perhaps it could be puritanically motivated, and that could be a crime against those who are perceived to be sex workers. I have had personal experience with the perception that massage equals sex work. When I was running a yoga business for 5 years, one of the services that we provided was therapeutic bodywork. Now, we didn't call it massage, even though some of our practitioners were licensed massage therapists, because of the very particular way in which massage is licensed and more specifically zoned in the city of Chicago. At that particular time that I was getting my business license, there were changes being implemented into the zoning codes for business districts that made you jump through even more hoops and costs and expenses associated with being able to say that you even offer massage services. And the rationale for this was to quote unquote crack down on these illegal sex work massage businesses. So we got around it by simply calling it therapeutic bodywork, which I was trained and certified in therapeutic Thai bodywork, which, oh man, if you call the type of bodywork that you're doing something Asian, then everyone immediately thinks that you're doing something of a less clinical, more sexual nature. And even in my short few years of providing those services, I had several phone calls and requests from people who were clearly seeking something I was not offering, and even had a couple of clients show up who I'm pretty sure had an idea in mind of what they were going to get that did not match up with what they actually received. So, this perception that massage therapy equals sex work is not exclusive to the Asian community, but I think 10,000 times worse. And one thing that I hadn't realized is the degree to which human trafficking is happening, particularly from China and South Korea, for bringing women into the United States under false pretenses and moving them through a chain of spas to provide these sexual services as a form of bondage or servitude from which they can't really escape, partly because of lack of resources and also partly because of the fact that these things are criminalized. And should they somehow manage to report what's happening to them to the authorities, they themselves would be prosecuted as criminals and not necessarily helped out of the situation. And these thoughts were coming about all before I had really dug in and done some research into it. And the conclusion that I come to is that it is all of these things and racially motivated. And even the pure fact that the individual responsible is saying that it was because he had a sex addiction and because he wanted to eradicate the source of temptation for falling prey to said addiction, that in and of itself, his perception that these women were sex workers, which we don't know at this point in time, I believe, just the mere fact that he had that perception says a lot about what is both an inherently racist perception of Asian women in the spa or massage industry and is also a very awful reality. So, as I was listening, reading, watching, gathering some information for myself, I came to the conclusion that this is about racism, sex work, sex addiction, gun control, and misogyny, and organized crime. And I want to give you a few resources that I think can do a better job of illuminating some of these different angles in a non sensationalist way and in a way of promoting cultural dialogue about some of the things that are being brought to light that maybe don't get talked about enough. The particular article that I found that was very helpful was from, of course, not an American media source, but The Guardian, based out of the UK. And there was an article called A Specific Kind of Racism: Atlanta Shootings Fuel Fears Over Anti-Sex Work Ideology by Marie Salas. And I want to read just a little bit of this article here for you and encourage you to go check out the full article, which of course I will be linking in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimposter.com/podenvy084. These words from Marie. This idea is ludicrous to many who have observed the surge in racist violence against Asian Americans during the pandemic. In the past year, there have been 3,800 reported incidents of anti-Asian violence, roughly 503 of which took place during 2021 alone. These statistics are according to the group Stop AAPI Hate. Women make up the vast majority of those attacked, and some argue that it is equally absurd to exclude discussion of anti-sex work sentiment from the conversation about these most recent attacks on the Asian community. Though it is not yet known whether any of the victims of the shooting provided sexual services at their workplaces, the gunman told police that the spas he opened fire on represented a, quote, temptation he wanted to eliminate, end quote, suggesting that he at least believed that they did. Advocates say this reveals the way racism, sexism, and anti-sex work sentiment work together to produce anti-Asian violence. No matter what, they say his crime was ultimately one against sex workers. The women, she said, quote, are de facto being seen as sex workers and being scapegoated as such. Removing the anti-sex work component really removes the crux of what this specific kind of racism is about: the fetishization of Asian women's bodies, the objectification of their bodies, and the assumption that Asian women are obviously going to be providing sexual services at massage parlors. The conflation of massage parlors and sex workers without any nuance is very specific to anti-Asian racism against Asian women. That's the end of what I'm going to read to you from the article, and I do recommend that you go back and read the rest, of course. And this is why I'm saying there are many layers to what is happening here that are important to consider. And I do want to take this opportunity to call your attention to some podcasts that have produced really thoughtful content around this topic, and also to use these shows as an example of what is possible when you use your platform as a space to have these cultural conversations, which can be fraught and can be difficult, but can also have a big impact in helping your listeners and your audience to reframe things, to consider things from different realities and different perspectives that they may not have had access to previously. And I think that if not your responsibility as a podcaster, at least this is an opportunity that you have with your platform. And of course, maybe you're not an expert in this particular topic. Maybe it doesn't make any sense whatsoever to talk about this incident on your show, but I encourage you to look for what are those difficult things that are part of the collective consciousness that you can talk about and that you can approach in a thoughtful, mindful, helpful, illuminating way that is relevant to your specific audience, your specific niche, your specific topic. Okay, so here are the shows. The first podcast I want to call your attention to is Beyond Reproach, hosted by Tux and Stephanie. Minisode 25, Stop Asian Hate. And this episode is great because, yes, it is inspired by the events that just occurred, but they actually went back and took a historical overview, a rundown of many incidents of anti-Asian racism that has occurred throughout U.S. history. Also, the aforementioned Sarah Buino, Conversations with a Wounded Healer. On March 30th, Sarah released a bonus episode, which is a reading of an article written by her colleague, friend, and former guest, Sarah Suzuki. The episode and the article are both called Stop Psychoanalyzing Mass Shooters. Life Kit from NPR on March 27 released Talking with Kids about Anti-Asian Racism. No small feat. And then this one was released in February of 2021, prior to the Atlanta incidents happening, talking specifically about the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes amongst COVID-19. And in fact, that is the title of episode 221 of Culture Chat with Mimi Chan. And then finally, of course, one of my go-to resources, Pause on the Play with Erica Corday and India Jackson. At the time that I'm recording this, their episode on this topic has not yet dropped, but I happen to know it's coming because I happen to work on their show behind the scenes. And that as of yet untitled episode will be releasing on Tuesday, April 6th. So go ahead, follow Pause on the Play, and you will get that episode when it is hot off the podcast press. Not a fun topic, but I would be curious to hear from you what podcasts and podcasters you think have been doing a great job with exploring conversations like these. Send me an email, Andrea@thecreativeimposter.com, with your picks and recommendations, or share on Instagram and tag me at @thecreativeimposter. I didn't do an official podcast angel for this episode because the tone just felt wrong. But I do want to say that if having dialogue, not just me talking in your ear, but actually being able to have a conversation back and forth about these kinds of things, how to say what and when, what our responsibility, what our privilege, and what our opportunity is as podcasters, as part of the media, and how to really define, hold up, and strengthen the culture that you are creating around your show, then I'd like to invite you to join me in the Podcast Envy Craft and Culture Club, which I will be facilitating via Mighty Networks. Currently, there is a wait list, and when you give me your email, you will be waiting to join, and I am waiting to see if there is enough of an interest to make a great community over there where we can have these kinds of conversations online. To be the first to get details and save your spot in the new Podcast Envy Craft and Culture Club, simply visit thecreativeimposter.com/craft and culture. Drop your email there for me, and then I can send you all the details when it's ready. Links, of course, for all of the articles, podcasts, and resources I mentioned will be in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimposter.com/pod envy 084. And that is linked in the description for this episode in your podcast listening app. Podcast Envy is produced by your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. That's me. The Podcast Envy theme music is by Valentin Sosnitsky, courtesy of the Free Sound Project at freesound.org, and our podcast Angel music is by Benjamin Mastropolito, also on freesound.org as Lemon Cream. All music is licensed under the Creative Commons. Our episodes are mixed by Edwin Ruiz, and hey, if you want your show to sound as good as ours, hire us. Put the magic audio mojo of the Creative Imposter Studios to work for you. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to making your podcast the envy of everyone else.